Welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be making the Abby Sling Bag. This one is a little bit more challenging than the tourist tote that we made the last time, but it is really cute and really fabulous and is a great everyday bag because you can fit so much in it, and it has a million pockets. But they're not hard to sew, and we'll go through all of them here. So check it out. We're going to get going here in just a second, and as always, we've got all the supplies you need to make it over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can get the pattern Abby Sling Bag by So Many Creations, as well as we'll have kits for this exact one if you like the way it looks for while supplies last anyway. And of course we have lots of other modern contemporary fabrics so you can make your own unique bag that your friends will be loving and wishing they had one too. Let's get started. So the first thing you need to do is follow all of your cutting instructions and in the pattern, and then fuse the pieces that need the decor bond to stabilize everything. So do that first. Pay particular attention with your cutting to the width and the height of the pieces, because you want to make sure that the motifs on your fabric are going in the right direction. So in other words, the height is going top to bottom, and then the width is going side to side. I definitely cut my lining the wrong way when I did this, but it's inside the purse, so I'm not gonna fuss about that. But pay attention, learn from our mistake, do that correctly. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna use a lot of the template pieces. I've already cut out this one according to the template piece that came in the bag, in the pattern. And what we need to do is we need to pin this together with the lining piece to create that front pocket in the purse. The way the pattern tells you to do it is to have your top piece on top, and then your lining piece basically the way it will be once it's all sewn together. So basically you've got your wrong sides facing together. I'm gonna flip that for this video because you guys are gonna have a hard time seeing me mark the template on such a dark print. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip that so that they're right sides together with the lining piece on top. It'll essentially be the same thing. They're still gonna be facing the correct way when everything's said and done. It'll just be easier for you guys to follow along and see at home. So now I'm gonna take my template piece 2, and first actually I need to pin this together, so we'll make sure we'll do that. I'm just going to pin in the spot where it's going to be coming off, so the corners, and then down the center because that's going to stay together. And then I'll pin at my bottom corners. And once I get my template piece drawn on, I'll add a couple more pins just on the inside to help keep it together once I'm cutting. All right, so what you want to do is line this up, and you're going to line, it says top right here. So you're going to line that up with the top of your piece. And then you're just going to take a marking tool. I'm using a friction gel pen. And I'm just going to mark on this. This is going to be inside. No one's ever going to see it. So you could use a pencil too if you wanted. I just really like using these. They go away with heat. All right, so we've got that side marked. Now we're going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. All right, so I've got my curves marked out. That's going to be the pocket for the outside. I'm going to go ahead and pin just right in here as well. That way it'll help hold it together when it's all cut out. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut on these lines. And the reason why you want to keep it together when it's pinned is you're definitely going to make sure that they are in line and pinned together, and they're going to fit together real nicely, as opposed to like maybe moving your template a little bit from one piece to another. This way you know they're going to fit nicely together when it's time to sew it. All right, so I'm just trimming and cutting out those pockets. All right, so now it looks like that. We've cut out those pockets and we're ready to sew these together and flip them over. So we actually already have this right sides together. So I just need to sew down this side, and then we're gonna stitch and flip. One quick note, if you hadn't already flipped these guys so that they're right sides together, the fabrics are right sides together, make sure you do that, because you want to make sure when you flip it the right way that it is in fact having the right sides of the fabric out. The pattern designer is a quilter herself, and so she's always using 1/4 inch seams, which is great because then all of us quilters who also dabble in bag making don't have to get adjusted to learn a new seam. So I'm just go ahead and sew along those edges. Just kind of turn it as I go. And I'm gonna go ahead and reinforce those stitches a little bit at the beginning and end. It doesn't say to do this in the pattern, but I've done enough dresses to know that it's really useful at this point to clip some little triangles out of the largest part of this curve to help it to lie nice and flat when we flip it around. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see how I do that. So this part's nice and straight. We don't really have to worry about that, but here's where it starts to curve. So I'm just gonna go ahead and come in. You want really sharp pointed tip scissors. Your embroidery scissors will work really well for this. And then about every 1/2 inch or so along the curve, I'm just going to clip in and take just a little triangle out of that. And that'll just help it lay nice and flat when we flip it all around. And the key point is to get up to, but not through your stitching line, because obviously if you go through your stitching line, then it's no longer sewn together at that point, and then you got a problem. All right, so I've gone and clipped through that, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So now I'm gonna open this up and reach my hand through to the top, and I'm just gonna go ahead and pull it through so that the right side is gonna be facing out, like that. So we have our right side facing out on the front and the back, and now we need to press this to get it to lay nice and flat. Now I'm gonna press with the outside part of the purse up, and I'm doing that because if the outside part rolls a little bit to the back, that's no big deal, no one's ever gonna see it. But if you are seeing the inner lining popping out, then you're gonna be able to tell and it's not gonna look as good. So I just wanna make sure that as I'm pressing it, that I'm not seeing any part of that lining. And thanks to clipping those curves, that is going down real nicely, and we're getting a nice smooth curve, and it's gonna look fabulous. All right, so go ahead and repeat on the other side, and then we're ready for the next step. So now we're gonna top stitch a quarter inch away from both sides of these curves. That'll help keep that nice and crisp as long as you use the bag. So now I'm just keeping the edge of the foot lined up with the edge of that fabric to get a nice even top stitch as I go around. I'm using quilting cotton today, so I'm just using a regular needle meant for quilting. Now I'm going to repeat on the other side. All right, so we've got the front pocket of our bag ready to go with the lining attached. Now we're going to put it on top of our second piece here. And so this is going to form our entire bag front. So you're gonna have some nice pockets here that you can store all kinds of goodies in that you'll have easy access to. And what I'm doing here is I'm just lining it up so that the top is nice and in line, and then my bottoms are in line as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and pin at the top and then all the way around this bottom, and then we're gonna start sewing together. All right, so I got everything pinned up, and then I also mark straight down the center using the chalk marking tool. You'll want to use a ruler to do that, so you're measuring exactly in between these pieces. We don't want to give away any measurements because you got to get the pattern in order to get all of that. Support the pattern designer. We all do this as a business, so help us continue to bring you more cool, inspirational things to make. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew within the seam allowance. So that means I'm going to sew an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that way my sort of stay stitching to keep all of this together is going to be hidden when we ultimately sew everything together. So I'm going to stitch all the way around the bottom of this pocket here. And then also I'm going to sew straight down that center, and that way when you're using these, you're going to essentially have 2 different pockets. That way you're not digging all the way to the other side to try to find your keys when they've slipped down in there. All right, so I'm just moving my needle as far to the right as it'll go so I can sew the skinniest seam allowance my machine will allow me to do. I'm going to go ahead and reinforce the stitches a little bit at the top. And then just really make sure that the edge of your fabric is in line with the edge of your presser foot, so that once we all sew this together in the end, all these stitches here are going to be hidden. All right, so I've sewn all the way around the bottom edge. Now I'm going to stitch down the center line. To do that, the easiest way for me to keep it in line is to go ahead and move that needle into that center position. That way I'm sewing straight down the center of my presser foot. You do want to make sure as you're sewing this that you are sewing as straight as possible, because especially if you're using a contrasting thread like I am, you're really going to see this as a decorative element. All right, so we got our front piece almost done. We've got our pockets ready to go and our decorative backing part here. We have one more element to add, and then the front of our bag is complete. So I've set my top to the side, and now I've got my two accent pieces that are going on the top. One of them does not have interfacing out of it, and one does. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay those right sides together with the interfacing side on top. This will help prevent stretching of your fabric. And I'm gonna go ahead and sew across these bottom sides. I'm gonna go ahead and pin that first so nothing shifts as I'm sewing. Make sure to turn your machine back to a 1/4 inch stitch for this step. I'm gonna slow down as I approach that center. I'm gonna go ahead and pull my pin, and when I think I'm in line with it, I'm gonna go ahead and turn, and I am, because my next side is now exactly in line with the edge. That's what you wanna have happen when you turn, and then you'll know everything is lined up correctly. Now for this one, I'm going to take that sharp pair of embroidery scissors and I'm just going to totally clip off that point within the seam allowance. This will help it make it lie nice and flat and give you a real sharp, crisp point when we flip it right sides together, or right sides out. We want the right side out. All right, so now we're going to flip this over like so. We really want to push that point out, make it nice and pointy. That's looking pretty good. Same deal, we're going to go ahead and give this a press, and I'm going to press with the interfacing side up so that we're not seeing any rollback from that lining fabric, because that's going to be hidden completely on this. We don't want to see that at all. All right, so we're just giving that a good press, making sure our tip is nice and pointy, and that I'm not seeing any of the lining fabric. I've just got the interfacing side up, and I don't see any of that poking through. So now we're going to take the piece we've been working on and we're going to lay this across the top, and your point should be exactly in line with that center piece that we sewed. So I'm going to line that up first and pin in the center. And then I'm going to pin across the top. All right, so now I'm going to do the stitching within the seam allowance. So that's that 1/8 of an inch stitch going all the way across the top and the side of this to secure that. And we're also going to do a top stitch a 1/4 inch away from this in order to keep it nice and attach it to the bag. All right, so we've got our bag front done now, and it is looking super cute with this detail pulling out the little lilac and all of that. And then we've got two nice big pockets where you can store a lot of goodies, from your keys to your cell phone and a whole lot more. All right, now we're gonna move on to the bag back. So the back starts out a lot like the front. So we're gonna have our interfacing on our back piece, and then we're just going to attach that top accent. There's no pockets on the back that you slide your hand in, but there is a zippered pocket, so I'm gonna show you how to do that. You're going to take your piece from your zippered pocket, and you're going to lay it down roughly in the center of where we're going. I'm gonna flip this so that the right side is facing up. And then you're just going to give it a pin on the top and the bottom to keep it in place. Then you're going to flip it over so the interfacing side is up, and following the instructions on the pattern. We're not going to give away the measurements here, so support the creator and get the pattern. You can get it from us over at shop.quiltaddicts.com. It is the Abby Sling Bag by So Many Creations. You're going to mark the placement of your zipper. And next we're going to sew around the outside of these lines, and that will secure the pocket lining to the back of our bag. Whenever I have to sew exactly on a line, I like to just have that needle in that center position. I'm going to go ahead and actually start in the center of the line. That way I'm not having thread breaking at the end. It'll make a more secure finish. And we're just gonna stitch all around the outside of that zipper that we drew. Slow down as I come to that point. Make the turn. And now I made that last turn. I'm going to sew a little bit further than where I started and then go ahead and break those threads. Now I'm going to take my rotary cutter and starting just a little bit in from where that corner is, I'm going to cut most of the way down this line until I hit just shy of the center of that. We're cutting through both the pocket lining and the interfacing from our bag back. Now I'm going to take my little embroidery scissors or your micro tip scissors, and you're going to cut right into that point, and then you're going to cut out to here. Be sure not to trim past your stitching lines. We want to keep those intact. You're cutting again the lining for the pocket at the same time as you're cutting your interfacing. So this is where it's going to start to make a little bit more sense. We're going to open up this pocket and we're going to pull our pocket lining pieces through it. So that way our pocket lining is entirely on the inside of the bag. And from the outside of the bag, we're just eventually just going to see the zipper opening there. So we want to gently bring this open. And these pocket pieces are going to fold over and back very nicely because of the way that we trim that. Your top one's going to fold back and your outside corner is going to fold out and so on. We're going to go ahead and press that. You do want to make sure as you're doing this that you are not stretching the fabric. You want it just to fold over nice and neatly. I'm going to start by doing my top and bottom, and then I'm going to do those tiny little sides. If you're having trouble getting it to stay put, go ahead and spritz it with a little bit of water or your favorite spray starch alternative, and then just give it a press with that iron, and that'll help it lay nice and flat. Once you're satisfied with the back, go ahead and flip it over, make any last minute adjustments you want. Again, this is the part that you're actually going to see, so you want to make sure that you are pressing that very nicely. Now for this next part, you can either use steam a seam or your favorite fusible. I just cut a piece down to size from my heat and bond that I always have around. What you're going to do is you're going to flip the pocket side up like so. And with the paper backing on, you're going to fuse the piece to the right side or the wrong side of your bag. This is going to help hold the zipper in place while we sew it down without having pins, and then you'll be able to sort of preview where everything is going to be and not have a wonky looking zipper when we're all done. Now I'm using a very long zipper because that's what I have on hand. You can always trim these down, so you don't need to worry about it being too big. You can just get the color that works best for you. See, this is cooled down pretty much. So what I can do now is I can peel off that paper backing so that I'm just leaving that fusible pointing up. Now here's where that fun zipper preview comes into play. What I can do is I can get this zipper so that it is perfectly in alignment, and then I can go over it with my iron. And we do have a lot of layers of fabric here, so spend some time with your iron so that it fuses completely to the zipper tape, and then you'll be able to just stitch around the edging here and have a perfectly placed zipper, and it'll be fabulous. You won't have to worry about things shifting when you're pinning. Don't worry, you will not melt the zipper teeth with your iron. Once you've got that successfully fused in place, you're just going to top stitch around the edge of the entire zipper to hold that in place for good. If you have a zipper foot, you can use that. In this case, I'm just going to put my stitch so that it is the furthest to the right as possible. That same stitch we were using when we were doing that inside stitching that's going to be inside the seam allowance. And just like before, I'm not going to start at a corner. I'm going to start inside a little bit. That way I can just go over that line and I don't have that stress point at a corner where it's going to have more chance of coming apart over time. right, I'm going to stitch just a little bit beyond where I started. And then I'm going to reinforce those stitches as well, just so I've got a really great secured end to my thread. Now is a really good time to always test your zipper, make sure it opens all the way and that you have indeed captured all the edges of your zipper on the back, which we have. This is also the time when you can cut through to shorten that zipper. I'm just gonna trim it off at the end here. And then it won't be too bulky in the back of your bag. All right, now we've got to sew the inside of this pocket together so that it actually holds what you need to and doesn't slip into the inside of the bag. Now, one thing to note here is because of where the pocket was placed, these edges are not going to line up perfectly when you flip them down. So what you want to do is just get your edges together, and you're first going to sew your top and your bottom edges. Then we're going to press it to figure out a nice straight seam for that side. Then we'll sew your side seams. It doesn't matter where your seam is going to end up because no one is going to be inspecting the inside of your pocket. So first let's start and just sew these top edges together. All right, so I've got that bottom edge sewn together. I'm just going to go ahead and press that down. And again, this is the inside of your back pocket. So perfection doesn't exactly matter at this point. So as long as it's coming together fine, you're good to go there. All right, so I'm kind of pulling that down so that it is coming over the top of where that zipper is. So I'm gonna go ahead and press up here. And then I'm just gonna press all the way down so that I can get a nice flat edge to my pocket. Then I'm just gonna sew down the edges here. It's gonna be a little tricky, but we do have a nice opening here where I'm gonna be able to get that underneath and just sew my 1/4 inch stitch down the edges of both sides. All right, so I made sure to fold the bag front out of the way so that I don't accidentally sew something I don't want to in there. And since this is a point that's gonna end up getting some stress, I'm gonna go ahead and reinforce those seams at the beginning and end. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and repeat on the other side of that pocket. All right, so now we got our bag back together. It's got a lovely pocket that you can store your wallet in or anything else that you don't want anyone to have easy access to. And now we're gonna put together our outside of our bag, and we are almost getting to the end of this bag. It is a really fun one. It turns out really cute, and it's definitely worth the extra steps to get it all together. So the instructions include 2 ways to do your handle, one if you're using cork, one if you're using fabric. I'm using fabric for mine. So what you're going to do is you're going to take it and you're going to fold it in half hot dog style, and you're going to press down the center to get that really nice crease. And then working one side at a time, press the edges toward the center like this, so that way you can conceal all of your raw edges. And now we're going to top stitch down both sides of this, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch stitch for that. Now we're going to attach the bag side and bottom to the back piece of our bag first. And this is another piece that has a template, so make sure that you follow that in the instructions of your bag in order to make that happen. One thing I want to do is I want to make sure I find the center of the bag, so that way I can match it with the center of my piece there. To do that, I'm just going to fold it in half and do a little crease there with my fingertips. And that's enough in order for me to get it nice and lined up. So the easiest way I found to do this is to first pin that center bit once you have that lined up, and then just work one side at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a turn, and I'm going to line up my top corner first so that those edges are nice and even. Then I'm just going to work my way down that straight edge, pinning, I don't know, every 3-4 inches or so. This straight edge is going to be easier to keep in line than when we get to the curve. All right, now before I continue on in this curve, I'm going to go ahead and pin the straight edge of the bottom too. That way I can ease in anything around that curve. It's going to be easier to do that on a curve because you're working with bias, which can be your friend in certain circumstances like this one. All right, so now I'm going to start working around that curve, coming in from both sides a little bit at a time here. Definitely pinning closer together, maybe every 2 inches or so here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pin that corner as well. I'm going to repeat everything on the other side. All right, so now I'm going to use a 1/4 inch stitch to go all the way around the side edges. Of course, we're leaving the top edge free. I'm still reinforcing those stitches at the top of and end of those seams because this is just going to be a stress point for the bag. So you want to make sure it is really nice and secure. All right, as I come to this curve, my main objective is to make sure that everything is flat as I'm going through, which is going to be a little challenging because we do have a lot of bulk here with that interfacing. So I'm just going really slow and just trying to press it as flat as I can within the seam allowance to avoid having any puckers. And if you end up taking a little bit deeper seam allowance because it's just a lot to work through, that's fine. No one's going to know. The key is just to go steady, slow and steady. All right, so now we're gonna basically repeat that process, just so we're gonna be sewing the front of the bag to our outside side pieces. Our final step to finish the outside of the bag is to add our handle. And this is probably one of the easiest things we have done so far today. All you're gonna do is you're gonna open your bag up, and you can kind of get a preview of how it's going to look on the inside. It's very fun. And what you're going to do is you're just going to line up your handle about center. You can measure it out if you want, but eyeballing it is just fine as well. And I'm just going to pin that in place. And then making sure that you don't twist your handle, you're going to line it up on the other side and pin that in place as well. Now we're going to sew over that multiple times. This is where the most stress of your bag is going to end up. So you want to make sure you're sewing over it at least 3 or 4 times with that seam allowance. That way if one thread breaks, you got 3 more holding it together. This is another instance where you want to be using that seam that's within your seam allowance. So that 1/8 of an inch stitch, because later we're going to be flipping this right sides out and we don't want to see those seams. The easiest way to do this and keep everything out of the way that shouldn't be, is going to be to go ahead and remove your table as if you were like sewing something circular, like a garment or something. And you're just going to sew across the top of it with the inside of your bag facing your throat plate. Now don't go over any of those seam allowance. You can just go ahead and sew within the seam itself, within that side. And I've done one, and I'm just gonna go ahead and keep repeating that until I've done it about 3 or 4 times to make sure that it's really nice and secure. Now is probably the most fun part, except for when we actually finish the bag. We get to turn it right sides out. Do be careful of those top edges. We don't want to pop any of those stitches. I'm kind of going around all the edges and pinching those seams together. So we're not really able to press it. This is a 3D object. I suppose you could if you really got at it. But this is already giving the bag a lot of shape and body. All right, so we can see already how cute this bag is looking. We've got our top, we've got our nice pockets on the sides here where we can fit all kinds of things with that center divider. And then on the back, we've got our zipper where we're gonna be able to store things that we don't want people to easily have access to. All right, so now we're gonna finish up that lining, and there's some pockets inside. There's loads of pockets. I know we all love pockets in our bags. And then we're ready to finish this back up. Now we're gonna prepare the divided pocket for the inside of our bag. So I've got my piece. It's already been fused to the interfacing and cut to the template. And now I've got my pocket here. So the first thing I have to do is fold it in half along the long edges here. And then I'm going to sew down here to create a nice turning point, so that way we can have finished edges on both sides. I'm just using a regular 1/4 inch seam, and I'm not pinning or anything. Just go ahead and sew. Now I'm going to go ahead and press that seam open. I'm making sure to just have the tip of the iron down, so that way I'm not pressing any of the sides at this point. Then we're going to turn everything so that the right side of the fabric is facing out. And we're going to press it again so that the seam is just an inch or so above where the bottom of that is. This is going to be on the inside of the pocket, so no one is ever going to see it. Now the pattern tells you how far from the top you're supposed to place your pocket. You want to make sure you've got the right side going up. This is a lining piece where I accidentally mixed up my width and my top, but it's the inside of the bag, so I'm going to let it be. But I do want my pocket to be facing up. So I'm just going to pin on the sides here, and then we're going to trim it down. Now before I sew, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip this over, and I'm just going to cut along the edges here to make sure that my pocket is nice and even with my template. Now I'm going to use that 1/8 of an inch stitch to stitch down the sides of that pocket, and that way it'll be concealed when we sew our lining together. I'm also going to go ahead and stitch along the bottom of the pocket to secure it to the lining. I drew a line down the center of that pocket, and I'm going to stitch along that as well. I'm going to go ahead and move my needle to the center position to do that, and that will create our 2 divided pockets for the inside of our lining. For this pocket, I'm putting my needle down just above where that pocket starts, and I'm going to reinforce those stitches by going backwards and forwards a little bit to really secure that well at both the top and bottom. Go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now we're going to prepare the recessed zipper top that goes inside the lining. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take the zipper sections and we're going to apply them using that fusible tape to both sides of the zipper and stitch around the top where you can see this here, it's nice and open, and this raw edge will get sewn in and hidden within the lining. So one side will remain open as we do this. So I'm going to kind of talk through some of this because the pressing mat I have has inch marks and grids on it, and we don't want to give away the measurements because we want you to support the pattern designer, So Many Creations, and get their lovely pattern to do this. But I'll walk through it with you here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take, and you can see I've applied a little bit of the fusible tape, and I just cut down my heat and bond to the specific sizes needed for this, so you don't have to get seam to seam if you've got that on hand. And you're going to apply it to the short ends. Then what you're going to do is you're going to fold that over like this one here and here, and you're going to remove the paper backing and fuse that in place. Then what you're going to do is you're going to apply a long strip to the right side of that fabric, and you're going to fold it over and press it like this. And then this part here, we're going to remove that fusible tape, and that'll help us position it on the lining of the zipper. All right, so all that's left here once I've removed that paper is the sticky glue, and it's folded over so that way I won't have a raw edge or anything. And what I want to do is I just want to line it up so that it's a little bit away from the teeth of that zipper and that it's nice and even with the side that I already put on there. And then also as I go, I want to make sure that the zipper teeth at the top are going to be curled underneath the piece, so that way we don't have any raw edges. Now your zipper is going to extend beyond this. That's okay. If you have one that's super long like mine, you can add a little tab at the back of it so that way it's not so long. But for the most part, this is what you're going to do. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to take my iron and I'm going to fuse this in place, and then I'm going to repeat with the other side, fusing it to the back, and then we're going to stitch around the outside to hold it in place for good. Since this outside section here isn't really fused, I've put a little pin in just to hold these corners together, and then also go through that zipper to keep that out of the way so it's not hanging out when we are all finished with our bag. All right, so now I'm just going to use my regular stitch to stitch an 1/8 of an inch stitch going all the way around the edges here. We're going to leave this part nice and free. So following the instructions in the pattern, you're gonna cut off the top of your lining piece. And I know that sounds scary, but this is how we create that recessed zipper. Then you're going to lay your zipper with the zipper side up, this part that we can pull and open up. And that's gonna be facing up, and we want to center that on our lining fabric, like so. You can measure that out or eyeball it, it's up to you. Then we're gonna flip this right sides together and line up all our corners and pin through all 3 layers. Now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam across the entire top of my piece, and I'm going to reinforce the stitches at the beginning and the end because this will be a stress point for the bag, so we want it to be nice and secure. I'm going to go ahead and press that seam just so that's going nice and toward the top of the bag. Now we're going to repeat this process on the other side. So we're going to lay it down still with the zipper side up. Get everything nice and centered. Then you're going to lay down your top piece, pin everything together, and sew again. You can preview that you've done everything correctly by just opening up this center part here. And if you can see the zipper facing forward and then this recessed zipper lining, then you've done it correctly and you've arranged it right, and you are good to sew and reinforce that seam. Now to make sure that your outside piece is the same length as everything, you're going to want to also cut off the tops of both sides and sew it together just like we did here. All right, it's time to assemble our lining and then we are good to go. So what we have to do first here is we've got to get it into 2 pieces so we can sew it on one side at a time. So you're going to want to unzip your lining as much as you can and then just get that out of the way so you don't have to worry about that. Then you're going to go ahead and start pinning the same way we did before. I'm going to go ahead and I've got my center figured out here and also on my other piece, so I can get that lined up. And the one thing you want to pay attention to that we didn't have to worry about the first time is we want to make sure we don't sew over the zipper. So make sure when you're lining everything up that you are putting it underneath so that the zipper will not get caught in there. And I've actually gone and pressed this seam down and these seams up so that way they're going to lock real nicely. And then you won't have that bulk as you're sewing around. Other than that, your pinning is going to be the exact same as we did for the front of the bag. And then you're going to do the same thing when you attach it to the other side. Just make sure you don't twist that zipper so that it's going in the correct direction. All right, so I've got everything pinned up to that center. I have my centerpiece well out of the way and the zipper is not in any of where I'm going to be sewing, so I'm not going to accidentally get that. There is one difference when you're sewing your lining together. On one side, you need to leave an opening for turning. So I'm just going to leave in between these 2 zippers or pins on the bottom. That way I can reach my hand through and pull everything through. I technically only need to leave enough to get your hand through, but I find the bigger the opening, the better, because then you're not going to accidentally rip your seams. Do make sure that you reinforce those stitches when you start and stop. So basically I'm going to sew all the way down to this pin, then I'm going to pick it up and sew all the way around to this side. When I sew my other side together, I'm just going to sew all the way around it because I only need to leave it on one of those sides. Other than that, this goes the exact same way as sewing together your bag front. So we're going to do that off camera and then we'll come back for our final bag assembly when we attach this to our bag front, and then we are all done. All right, so now we've got our lining with the wrong side out and our bag with the right side out. What we're going to do is with the zipper all the way open, you're going to go ahead and slide the outside of your bag inside the lining. It's important to note that both the zipper and your handle should be tucked inside the bag at this point, because we're going to sew all the way around the top and then pull everything through. That way the handle will be on the outside once we flip everything right side round. All right, so I've got everything stuffed inside. So now what you want to do is just line up those corners. And if you can press it so that your seams from your lining and your outside are going in opposite directions, that will make for a flatter join. You can also use clips at this point, especially if you use core, that's helpful. The seam is very thick at this point, so it might be easier to use the binding clips instead of the pins. But go ahead and start pinning working at this bag sides first and then evenly across the top. All right, so I've got everything pinned all the way around at this point, making sure that my seams of the side of my bag are nice and neat. And I've still got my opening for turning down here, so that's where we're gonna flip everything right side out when we're all done. So now I'm just gonna sew all the way around here. I'm gonna do that again by removing my extension table on my machine so I can sew it in the round, just like if it was like a sleeve hole for a garment. I always like to start at the back, and that's just if I overlap my stitches funny at the end, then it's gonna be harder to tell over there. I'm gonna go ahead and reinforce the stitches to get started. And then just make sure you remove your pins as you go and go all the way around the entire bag top. You may want to do it a second time if you're worried you haven't caught all the layers, because there are quite a few at this point, but that's up to you. All right, so now we're going to take our hand and we're going to put it through the opening of that bag, and you're going to very gently open this up and pull it through. And just be very careful that you're not ripping at these side seams, because then you might have more to stitch up than you had planned on. And again, that's why I always reinforce those stitches at that bottom that we leave open for turning, as it's less likely to happen. If it does rip, it's not the end of the world. You just have a little bit more to sew when you're done. All right, so I wouldn't spend too much time getting this inner lining nice, because we're just gonna push it back. What I am going to do though is kind of run my hands through the bottoms here to make sure that's nice and pushed out. But this part I'm just going to go ahead and stuff right back in. All right, before you get too much further, go ahead and look all the way around the tops of your bags and make sure you cut all of those seams, because you want to make sure you've done that before we're going to do our top stitching and pressing. I'm going to go ahead and tuck the zipper inside for right now, because what I need to do now is focus on getting this lining so that it's a nice crisp top all around. I'm going to go ahead and use my iron at this point to do that, although I can still press it in a little bit more with my hands. But using your iron and a little bit of spray starch or spray starch alternative, I'm actually just going to use water in a spray bottle, will help you get a really nice crisp seam, and then we can top stitch around it and get that nice and secure and good to go. So I press this about as much as I can to get it as crisp as I can on top. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna sew around here with my 1/4 inch stitch, or actually I'll do about an 1/8 inch stitch, I think, for my top here. And I'm just gonna make sure that this lining is always rolled in. So by working from that top, we'll be able to make sure that you're not seeing the lining from the front of the bag, that it's just a fun little surprise once you get a peek inside. I still have the extension table off of my machine because I want to be able to just roll this around as if it were a garment. And I'm just making sure that I'm just rolling this back with my fingers, and I'm going to start again on the back, and I'm really just going to take my time going through here. Go ahead and reinforce those stitches to get started. And I've got a couple of inches where I like the way it's rolled back. Then I'm just going to roll back again, making sure that I can't see that lining from the front. And I'm just gonna go slow and steady like this around the entire thing. Again, make sure that that handle is nice and free and clear when you get to that point. You don't wanna sew that down. You want it to be able to function as a handle. And just making your way slowly around the entire bag. Again, when I get around to the point where I started, I'm going to sew 1 inch or 2 beyond, being real careful to stay on the stitching line since that's going to show. Then I'm going to reinforce those stitches so that I've got a really strong join. So here we have it, the Abby Sling Bag. It is pretty big. It's going to hold a lot of your things, and there are a million pockets in this. We've got the 2 pockets in the front that we can put all our easy to access things are. There's a pretty large pocket in the back that can fit your wallet. And then we've got pockets on the inside as well, so that you don't lose all your goodies on the inside of your bag. I really enjoyed making this one. I think it's really cute. We are gonna have kits using this fabric while supplies last. I think it's a pretty cute one for fall. We've got some moss in it, but they're real feminine colors, so it'll look good as you transition in the season. Thanks so much for following along. Again, if you enjoyed this tutorial, a great way to say thanks is to get the supplies from us. The Abby Sling Bag pattern is going to be available on our website, shop.quiltaddicts.com. And again, you can get kits as well. And we have lots of modern fabrics and all your interfacing that you need to make this. Thanks so much, and until next week, happy quilting.